I know there's quite a few people that know or are aware of Annie's passing, and there's several people, quite a few people actually, that are very familiar with the story of her diagnosis and the progression of those 14 months. But there's still a number of people that aren't aware that she passed away, and furthermore, what happened. We certainly weren't hiding it or keeping it a secret from anybody. We told quite a few people. As a matter of fact, we were very open with it, and about it with everyone that we came into contact with, that we were helping from a professional or business standpoint, or even just on a personal relationship standpoint, here in the community. But I know there are, like I said, there's people that are not aware that she passed away, and I just wanted to jump on here real quick, well, as quickly as I can. Obviously, I can't wrap all this up in just a few minutes, but I'll give you the summarized version of what happened, and how things progressed from June to August. Basically, last year when COVID hit, things were shut down, as all pretty much all over the place. And in April and in May, Annie was starting to have just a little bit of nagging pain in her right hip, and it wasn't severe by any means. It was just kind of just a nagging ache. As things started opening back up and capacity restrictions started to lift even in the slightest degree, we decided to pack up and take the kids and go to Orange Beach, and we went there for a week down in Florida. Throughout that trip, her hip was really giving her a lot of trouble, and again, not to where she was in excruciating pain, but her pain tolerance, like most women, is through the roof. So what to her is nagging pain, to many others would be potentially excruciating. But towards the end of that trip, she had a really rough time with walking on the sand, and just her overall comfort level as a whole. She'd be walking around and just stop and kind of grimace in pain. And the way it was presenting to all of us made it seem like she had either an issue with her SI joint, or maybe a slip disc or a pinched nerve or something like that. That's kind of just how she made it seem. And she really couldn't articulate or tell us exactly what it was, other than it was just in her hip. So for a woman that despises chiropractic medicine, and not despises for any reason, she just hated the idea of someone cracking her bones. She eventually agreed to come back home and see her chiropractor, and she did that for about 4 weeks. And through x-rays and different things, there was really no improvement, and her hip kept hurting. And during that, at home, we started to notice that she was, squinting her eyes or closing one eye while she was talking, and she was just making complaints about how the sunlight coming through some of the windows was bright and it was affecting her vision. So she was closing one eye, and it came to the point where it was something that she was just doing without even noticing she was doing it. So anyway, the chiropractic thing kind of was unfruitful, and it didn't really yield anything, and the chiropractor recommended that she go see an orthopedist. She did that here in town in Subdural, and they did x-rays, and he came back and mentioned that it seems and it's presenting like it was possibly a slip disc or a pinched nerve, and gave her some exercises to do and wanted her to start going to therapy and doing some other things. So through all that, she's having more and more issues with her eyes, and we questioned the orthopedist about that and wanted to know, why the steroid shot and a few other things that he gave her, if that could possibly be affecting anything in an optic sense. And they were pretty matter of fact that anything that they would be doing in their office had no bearing on any type of cranial nerve or optic nerve whatsoever, and that she needed to go see her eye doctor. So she goes and sees the eye doctor. Eye doctor does their thing. At this point, she's having what's called a sixth nerve palsy in her eye. So as your eyes move left to right without moving your head, from left to right on that lateral plane, her right eye would only go about halfway. So if she looked all the way over here, her left eye would fully come up to the far corner of her eye, but her right eye would stop in the middle. It couldn't move anymore. It's kind of stuck. So she goes to the eye doctor. They do their thing. He's concerned because she had type 2 diabetes, and that was being controlled and being managed well. But this type of sixth nerve palsy shouldn't be something that she's dealing with, especially with managed diabetes. So they decide to do an MRI, and of course they do an MRI on a Friday, so we have to wait until Monday for those results to come in. Results come in on Monday, and he calls her up and basically tells her that there's a lot of things that are concerning in the imaging and that she needs to make an appointment with an oncologist, which was a big scary word at the time, because why the hell do we need to see an oncologist? Because her vision is having issues. So anyway, she calls her primary. Primary starts making phone calls, and with no rhyme or reason as to who they're calling, they make an appointment for her. It's about 3 or 4 weeks out, which was unacceptable. So thankfully, we have some very close friends that were able to get us in to see an oncologist here at the through the UT Medicine group in Sevierville. Dr. John Faust, great special human being. We go see him, and during that appointment, and by the way, the appointment was made the same day. When I called my buddy, he got me in to see this oncologist, to see Dr. Faust that same day. So we go see him, he does his thing, and he does a full skeletal survey, which is basically a full body x-ray. And he comes back and he's showing us the imaging, and her entire skeletal survey, the way he put it, her entire skeletal structure was moth-eaten. That's the best way to describe it with how the imaging looked. It looked like there was just moths eating into the bone across her entire body. And when you're, the layman looking at any type of imaging like that, it looks normal. You don't know what you're looking at, which is why now at this point, this wasn't my feeling in the beginning, but now at this point, when chiropractors and orthopedists are doing these x-rays, all of this stuff was very evident at that time, but was not really caught. And quite frankly, it wouldn't have mattered if it was caught during those office visits or at that time. It was a month or two before the oncologist saw it. So he basically looks at us and tells us that he's 99% sure that she has multiple myeloma. And he goes on to explain what multiple myeloma is and how it affects the blood and the stem cells and the plasma in the blood and bone and all these things. Relatively rare. I believe the statistic is 1 in 200,000 people a year get diagnosed with this. But we had countless people tell us that if you're going to get diagnosed with any type of cancer, this is the one that you get diagnosed with. There's tons of options, tons of research. It's one of the most heavily funded researches when it comes to cancer that's out there. And there's a lot of people that can manage this and deal with it for years. And some are not so fortunate. They don't get a whole lot of time. Others have it, and manage it for 15, 20 years. So, why can't that be us? Why can't we be one of those that manages it for that long? But he looks at me in the office that day and he says, if this was my wife, we wouldn't be going home. You need to go to the emergency room. The whole basis for going to the emergency room was for testing. If he was going to run tests in the office and do all the blood work, he was going to have to send it to UT anyway, and they were going to take days to process everything and get it back to him. And he just felt that being admitted was the best way to go ahead and get everything done and expedited. The other thing worth mentioning is at this time she was not presenting in her normal self. She was disoriented. She was slurring her words. There was a lot of things that she was cognizant about that she was concerned with because, this is not her normal self. It's kind of funny looking back on it now. I had people from the, community and from the real estate industry that would call me up and just express concern about, was Annie okay? Was she having a problem with day drinking? Which is kind of funny now looking back on it. Because she was slurring her words. There was a lot of things that she was just having trouble articulating. And turns out it was all because of this. So we go to the emergency room from the office, and she's in the hospital for 15 days from that point. And this is back in June of 2020. She was in full organ failure across multiple organs. And most of the people at the hospital, including the oncologist and that whole team, were just completely taken back that she was presenting the way that she was, but also completely seemingly normal from a pain perspective, because according to them, it should have been just agonizing. And in typical Annie fashion, just don't feel all that great, but otherwise okay. So Turns out she is hypercalcemic. Her calcium score was a 17.1, which for a woman should be somewhere around 8.5 to 10. Hypercalcemia does a lot of things in your body. You can look that up. Hypercalcemia is nasty in terms of what it will do to you. So they had to be pretty aggressive in correcting it along with other things. So when they do so, they overcorrect it, and it's this balancing act of hyper, hypo, hyper, hypo, and just trying to get it dialed in. At the time, the pain was getting worse from her hip and from the optic nerve being blocked. They give her steroids in the hospital, and that fixes the optic nerve and her eye palsy within 24 hours. Pain meds at that point are through the roof, and palliative care, who were great, just phenomenal human beings. The job that they do and the way that they do it it's indescribable. And the people that they have to handle and the situations they're a part of every day and how they do it with grace and is just beyond me. But they were amazing, and they got her pain control dialed in pretty well, to the point where she was leveled off and doing pretty good, and we go home. So once we get home, the pain medicines are being managed. She's doing well. She starts the regimen of chemotherapy, which at this time was something called Cyborg-D, which is a pretty normal type of regimen. It's not super aggressive. It's very bearable from a patient perspective. And she did that for several months, and all of her scores were going in the right direction. Everything was looking great. All the while, the plan was to get her positioned and well enough to go ahead and do a stem cell transplant. That's kind of like that's just what you do. You don't have to do it. There's a lot of people that elect not to do it, but that was our goal. We were setting up to get a stem cell transplant performed at Vanderbilt. So she's doing her treatments. Everything's going well. Towards the end of 2020, she starts having an issue with her eye again in December, end of December, after Christmas. And we go and have that obviously looked at. And at the time, they run what's called a layered MRI. That's not the official term for it, but it's a really cool way they do the imaging for the MRI, and it allows you to see certain vantage points from the imaging instead of just what you're normally used to seeing from an MRI image. And they find a spot which is dead center in her head. So dead center here, dead center from here. It's a bony structure that sits right in behind your nasal cavity, and there was cancer on it because the cancer is attaches to the bone. So that piece of cancerous gelatinous substance was also depressing on some of the optic nerves, and it was causing the palsy. This time it was in the opposite eye. At that point, they get UT radiation oncology involved, and it's also kind of a setback because what we think is being successful in terms of the chemo treatments with the Cyborg-D obviously is not, because it's not reaching everywhere. And in a lot of cases, it's hard to reach those places in your head, especially if it starts getting into what they call sanctuary sites, or having to get past what is the blood-brain barrier. At this point where this spot was, it was not in that space yet, but it's still a sanctuary site where the chemo was not aggressive enough to get to it. So radiation oncology at that point puts together a plan for 10 treatments, basically 2 weeks, Monday through Friday, of a very, very targeted, very focused radiation, and she handles that like a champ. No issues from it whatsoever. No lethargy or nausea or anything. You wouldn't even know she was having the treatment. After about 6 days, the palsy is relieved and everything's back to normal. So at that point, because of the concern about that spot even being there, we changed the regimen completely from a treatment standpoint and go to something that was called KD PACE. PACE is an acronym for something I'm not even going to try to repeat because I'll butcher it, but it is, they call it the devil's drug, so it's substantial. It requires inpatient infusion, had to be done at Vanderbilt. It is 4 days of a constant drip while you're at the hospital, inpatient. And then you come back home for 2 additional weeks of a single day infusion here at the treatment center in Subdural. So we had to do that twice. So it's a 3-week rotation, a week off, and then you did it again for 2 total treatments. She handled that really well. She really didn't feel bad from that. A little bit of GI issues, but when I say GI issues, I mean just a little bit of discomfort. No nausea, no diarrhea, nothing like that. I mean, for all intents and purposes, this entire time, other than the way the eye looked, you would not know she was sick. Still had all her hair, still working, same old Annie. So we start this Katie Pace treatment in the first quarter of 2021, and it does very well, along with the radiation, taking care of that spot in her eye. All of her numbers come down, pretty drastically, and they come down to a point where Vanderbilt is very happy with where they're at, and we start making preparation and getting everything ready for the stem cell transplant. So stem cell transplant takes place on May 7th. So the way that they handle that is, that's her rebirth date. That was a new birthday that she was given, May 7th, 2021. And they do that because, when you get a stem cell transplant, even with them being your own stem cells, there is a version where it's donor stem cell, but she did not have to do that. This was her own stem cells. She basically had a reset of her body. So much to the fact that all of her childhood immunizations were pointless. She would have to do all of those over again. And you do that after your body is, recovered and strong enough after the stem cell transplant's done. But what we did find out through all of this is that the myeloma that she has was extremely aggressive. And we knew that, pretty early on. There's all different things that can happen inside of your DNA structure, inside of your chromosomes. There's a different thing called a translocation of chromosomes with how they attach to one another. And if they have these issues in this translocation, it basically creates just a breeding ground, and it makes it much more aggressive than what it would be if it was, if everything else was normal, other than having cancer, of course. So once you have any of these other aggressive qualities, it becomes a completely different ballgame. But still, even people that have these are able to go ahead and manage it and live pretty fulfilling lives. And the whole objective is with this, because there is no cure, there still to this day is no cure, is to stay out in front of technology. You're looking for treatments, and you're looking for things that are going to allow you to manage your life, your quality of life, which is the most important piece, and stay in front of advancements. If you can manage this for 2 or 3 years, the way that this thing is funded and the research they're constantly doing, it's a safe bet that a trial comes out or something happens that you're able to become a part of, and it gives you more time. And hopefully that trend continues, and ultimately maybe you come upon a cure. So it's all about buying time. But with the aggressive nature of this, they wanted to do the stem cell transplant twice. It was going to be the once in May and then again in August, basically 100 days later. The way I had always explained it to people was she was going to get a dual rinse cycle. She was going to have this done 2 times. So she does the transplant in May. We're there for 35 days, and she does phenomenal. They told her that, she handled it, better than most, one of the best that they've seen, because she had, no issues whatsoever. And they let her go home. We come home, I think, June 2nd. Shortly after being home, I go away on a fishing trip, right after we get home after a day or 2. Wasn't really planning on going. She didn't really give me an option. It was basically, you're going. There was really no discussion to it at all. So I leave. I come back home after about 5 or 6 days. And after a day or 2 of being home, she has a fall in the house. She actually fell trying to close the office door. And we're not entirely sure what happened, but my suspicion is that she reached out for the handle while she's leaning over a little dog fence to keep the dogs out of the office. And I think she thought the handle was in her hand, and I think she just had some disorientation and some issues with her balance. So when she thought the handle of the door was in her hand, she kind of shifted her weight and didn't really support herself like she needed to be, and she fell. And she fell down on the ground, and that happened as I was walking back in the house from being outside. So I help her up and obviously give her the, you can't fall, it's very dangerous. Treatment is known for really wrecking all of your counts. Your white count's low, Your platelets are really low. The danger with the platelets is they get so low that if you hurt yourself or fall, you can bleed, and not just bleed externally, which is a concern, but bleed internally. And that becomes very concerning. It's very dangerous. So falling for any cancer patient that has these really bottomed out low numbers is extremely dangerous. So it scared her, and she was good, and we told the doctor about it. Everything was seemingly normal, and we carried on. By the next week or two, she started having issues with a headache that was pretty bad, and we ultimately go to the emergency room to have an MRI done. That was the quickest way to get the MRI done. And when we do that, the headache is so bad that her oncologist decides to just admit her to the hospital. So they admit her. At this point, within like 24 hours of going into the hospital, she started having issues with her eye again. And that was concerning because we know what that means now. We didn't know really what it meant the first time. We kind of had a good understanding of what it meant the second time when it happened in January, but when it happened for the third time in June of 2021, we knew that wasn't good. And that means that spot on her head is not playing nicely. So they do all their tests again. They're running blood cultures, they do blood gas, they do everything. They do a lumbar puncture because that's the first thing that you do, especially being post-op or post-transplant. You're so susceptible to infection and everything else that they wanted to make sure that she didn't have an infection. So they do a lumbar puncture, and they start that process for testing her cerebral spinal fluid, which is what they pull out when they do a lumbar puncture. That process takes several days. You can start getting results back pretty quickly, but the cytosis for what they spend in that process for that fluid can take up to 4 or 5 days. When they first come in, infectious disease after a day or two, tells us preliminarily it looks like it's an infection, which sounds strange to say, but that's really good news. We can treat infection. We can do things like acyclovir and other very broad spectrum antibiotics to treat infection. That's much better than the alternative, which would be finding cancer in that space. 2 days go by, they come back in and kind of have to eat their words. They tell us that it's not infection, and they're starting to see plasma cells in the spinal fluid, and that they're pretty confident that it's going to come back when it's fully done spinning, that it's going to be cancer. So fast forward another day or two, and indeed that's what it is. It was cancer that had gotten into her spinal fluid, which once that happens, it becomes CNS disease. And CNS disease, CNS being central nervous system, is nasty. 1 to 2% of all cases actually have that happen. It's a little more prevalent in breast cancer patients, but still very, very rare. So now you have 2 battles internally going on completely. Inside of that CSF, inside of that space, that definitely is where the blood-brain barrier comes into play. Just about all of the normal treatments, all the general medicine from a chemotherapy standpoint, they don't have the ability to cross into that area. By design, the human body will protect that area at all costs, and the barrier is extremely tough to penetrate. So there is no designated or designed treatment for that, but what the industry does as a whole is they do what's called intrathecal methotrexate, and they perform that through interventional radiology. So she essentially has the lumbar puncture 3 times a week for several weeks, and they're pulling fluid out to test it, get a baseline from it, and then they inject methotrexate, which is, we'll call it a chemotherapy drug, into that very confined space, and it's really potent. And she did really well with that. And by about 3 weeks of doing that, she was, from a medical standpoint, she was in remission as far as the CNS disease was concerned. Through all that, she did 3.5 weeks of a very broad, old school type of radiation that was her entire head and upper thoracic region. That was a lot tougher than the previous radiation she had in January. The old school stuff it'll kick your ass pretty bad. Very lethargic, worn out. Again, no issues with diarrhea or nausea, just dead to the world. But even with that, she would still be up and around, and she'd still be out here and hanging out. And then when she was ready just to go lay back down, she'd go lay back down. But through all this, we had made the decision, months prior to pull the trigger on the pool project, thing that she was very largely involved in and had a great hand in designing. And we were pressing them hard, the contractors all, to really get this project done. We needed to get her home from the hospital. It was the middle of summer. We wanted her to be able to use the pool. We didn't know, based on this new diagnosis, did she have a month left? Would she make it to the holidays? We just didn't know. I mean, I know what the literature says, and I know everything that I read, what it suggested. But, when you're dealing with 1% and 2% chances of X and time frames, she's an extraordinary woman. We were of the mindset that if 1 or 2% of the people are able to defy and manage this longer than what the norm is, why can't it be her? So that's the mindset we took with this. So we pushed the project pretty hard and get them to get it done as quickly as they can so she can utilize it, which she was able to, probably half a dozen times. But in the hospital, you're dealing with all this, you're getting that news, and all of us actually, but she was pissed. She was really mad at the first onset of the news and what it meant. As you can imagine, a lot of emotions, a lot of different things that are just flooded into your mind about life, about, everything. You basically get that kind of news and think about every aspect of your life, past, current, future, all of it. So for us, me, the kids, the family, we had a completely different feeling on it, but also had to sympathize with her and understand her position on it. For us, we were thankful that we knew what we were dealing with. We didn't know what time frame we had. We knew that it had a very good chance to be a short time frame, but again, we also didn't know. They were never definitively telling us what time she had left or anything like that. But we made it a point at that time to have discussions amongst us all and with her about what it meant to be able to take the time that was left, no matter how short or how long, and plan things and get things ironed out and get things situated and taken care of, so that when that time came, whether it was 2 weeks from then or another year, everything was taken care of. So that's what we did, and that's what we started doing. All the while, she was still pretty pissed off about the whole thing. But there was a point about 3 weeks into that where she transitioned from seeing this news and, in her mind, what was a death sentence, as being very negative and wishing that, if you have to go, you'd rather just be hit by a bus walking across the street one day, as opposed to being told this is what you've got and this is likely what the outcome's going to be. She transitioned into this place where she was seeing the positive aspects of being told that the end is likely imminent, just not knowing when, which you could say is what we're all dealing with, but for her it was much more imminent than the rest of us. And seeing the opportunity that presented itself on multiple scopes, from just planning, talking with her children, her and I having countless conversations about all kinds of things you never really think you're going to discuss. Her mom got to come into town, which was an event in and of itself. Getting across the Canadian border was not an easy task. Ultimately, they let her into the country, and she got to spend 3.5 weeks here, which was amazing. She got to spend a lot of time with Annie, and everyone's very grateful for that. But during that whole process, we're still going through the treatments. We're still talking to insurance companies. We went to Emory over in Atlanta to the Winship Cancer Center and talked to some of their leading oncologists, hematologists there about what the next steps could be in terms of treatment. So while we knew what we were dealing with, there was certainly never a moment of, all right, we're done. This is just what it's going to be, and we're just going to kind of sit back and let it unfold. That's not where we were at. And if you know Annie, that's just not how she works. She's going to fight until there was not a way or a possibility of fighting anymore. So we did that trip to Atlanta in August, August 2nd or 7th or something around there. At this time, she's still in, medically speaking, remission in that, in regards to the CNS disease. So still doing treatments, still, looking for what the next options are, still dealing with the oncology team here at UT. And all the while, she's feeling okay. Through that process, through that time, she has 2 more falls. She falls out here on the pool deck, getting out of the pool one day. And everything that we did out here was with great assistance and help. People were glued to her every time she was out here. She was either being wheeled in a wheelchair or walking with a walker or being held onto, because she was weak. So getting even out of the pool, she had to be carried. But she's walking across the pavers one day, and it's hot as hell. The pavers are hot under her feet, and she decides that she needs to speed up because her feet are burning. And her body was not capable of speeding up, and she falls. And she goes face first down to the ground, and her whole body just hits the floor. And luckily, she did not outwardly have any major injuries. But that fall was not good. That really scared her, and in her mind, she figured that fall was definitely going to have a bad outcome. She wasn't sure what or how, but that fall was not good. A few days later, we as a family, everybody's in town, wanted to go out to dinner. She had not been really out doing anything. We went to Pancake Pantry. She did not give that up. We went to Pancake Pantry a few days prior to that. But August 12th, we went out to a restaurant here locally, one of the newer restaurants that she had yet to try, and she really wanted to go have dinner there. So we pack everybody up, get in the car. She's getting into the car the night of August 12th, which is a Thursday. She hits her head on the car door, which, again, not good. At this point, she's getting whole blood and platelets once, twice a week because everything is so low. The hitting of her head on the car door immediately gives her this unbearable headache. In true Annie fashion, she makes it through dinner. She has a good time. We come home. At this point, I'm still the one managing all of her medicine and pain meds, and I do so and I left a few things out in terms of different trips to the ICU related to blood pressure and everything else that resulted in issues with pituitary gland and thyroid based on radiation treatments, and all of those things are part of the story, but they don't affect the end. So at this point, I am the one managing pain meds, and it's largely bearing on blood pressure results that I'm taking from her at any given moment, especially before bed, before she's getting meds. She gets her normal medicine that night, and around 5 a.m. she wakes me up just making different noises and rolling around, and I'm not sure what she's doing. I turn the lights on. She's super disoriented. She's speaking English and French at the same time, which is a trick in and of itself. She's trying to present an argument as to why we are not going to get up and immediately go to the emergency room. Obviously, that argument didn't hold any water, nor did it make a lick of sense. So we get up, we go to the emergency room. So we are admitted that morning of August 13th. And they do all their testing. They run all the cultures again, blood gas. I mean, they run the gamut on everything. It's kind of funny because some of those doctors in there, especially the ED physicians, they get kind of excited. Now that sounds weird in this story, but they get kind of excited because some of the tests that they do are things that never get performed or that they're never a part of. So, to them, it's super unfortunate, but it's kind of cool that they're getting to experience that side of medicine. That's not very common, I guess, for them. And they are all phenomenal. You know, the whole UT staff is phenomenal. The ICU nurses, the regular nurses on floor 10 in the UT tower that deal with immunocompromised patients are amazing. Again, a special breed of human beings. The ICU nurses, another level even after that. They're just unbelievable how they handle everything, how they process it all. The level of care that they give, it's just really, really, really cool. Anyhow, we're admitted. They run all their tests, multiple CT scans, multiple MRIs. Doesn't take very long within the first 24 hours for them to come back and say that they found a bleed in her head. Subdural hematoma bilaterally, so it's not any major bleed or one big site that's just gushing blood. It's just a very thin layer that's kind of everywhere on both sides. So she winds up in neurocritical care. During that whole 10 days of being in the hospital, she's back and forth between neurocritical care and regular immunocompromised floors, and back and forth. And the process of how they treat the patients when you're on a regular floor versus a neuro ICU floor is very different. Whenever she's in the neuro floor, she's much more uncomfortable because they cannot medicate her in the same way they can on the regular floor, because they have to do their neuro checks. And if she's too medicated, she can't pass the neuro checks. And that creates a lot of confusion for the doctors because they're not sure if it's truly a neuro issue or if she's just too medicated to pass the exam. So anyway, the bleed is continuing. They finally get it to a point where they seem to think that it's stopped and it's dissipating. And she started to feel okay about 5 or 6 days in. Because of the nature of the hospital and how they work and being on a neuro floor, I was not allowed to stay there every night, but I was just staying in a hotel right in downtown Knoxville. So I'd just leave after visiting hours were over and come back the next morning. One of the mornings I got there, I think it was like that Thursday, maybe the 18th or 19th, I had walked in. She was on a regular floor at that point. And I walked in and she was, her normal chipper self in the morning. And she's like, "You just missed all the excitement." And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And turns out that she had fallen off of the bedside commode onto the floor of her hospital room. They were right in the middle of shift change around that 7 a.m. mark. Nurse came in, helped her get on the bedside commode. She's sitting there, and the nurse is standing there. Annie tells the nurse, "I can't pee if you're watching me," true Annie fashion. Nurse is like, "Okay, I'll be right outside the room. We're doing shift change. We'll come back in and check on you." The few days leading up to that, with the issue with the bleed, the neuro stuff, the amount of medicine, she was, in some cases, on the toilet or on the commode or sitting on the side of the bed, and she would just drift out. I don't know if she'd fall asleep, but she'd just drift out. I'm fully convinced that she was sitting on the bedside commode and just had one of those moments and just fell forward. I don't think she fell backwards because the commode never flipped over, but they found her on the floor. The next nurse came in like 25 minutes later. She's laying on the floor of the room. The assumption is she hit her head on the bed as she fell forward. Nobody knows. Nobody was in there. But from that moment going forward, things got pretty bad. The head pain, the bleed was, pretty fired up again. And the next day, she was just so bad that the pain meds required kind of just put her into this, I don't want to say non-responsive state, but it was pretty close to it. We could still have short little spurts of conversation with her where she would reply with just, 1 or 2 3-word answers. Shortly after that, she became even more non-responsive just because of the pain meds. And on August 20th or 21st, it's a Friday night or a Saturday night, after talking with the oncology hematology team, after talking with the doctors at Emory and the neuro people, everyone pretty much concluded that it just wasn't going to get better, and that we needed to just make her comfortable. At this point, she was starting to have issues with her lungs, her oxygen. O2 sats were in the 80s, and that was with having the nasal cannula, and not just the regular nasal cannula. It was the high volume. She was on BiPAP for 48 hours, so she was getting 40 and 50% oxygen, not just the 5% that you normally can get through just the regular nasal cannula. And at that point, when we decided that there was no improvement and that she was just not responding and that the pulmonary things were getting worse, they had a pulmonary expert come in from another hospital and said that there's really nothing that they can do about it. It wasn't necessarily pneumonia as you would normally expect it to be, but a version of it, and it just wasn't anything they were going to be able to get a hold of or try to treat. So anyway, collectively as a family, and she had medical directives in place already, so all of this stuff was already outlined and set into motion. Well, not set into motion. It was outlined to be set into motion should we get to this type of point. So the decision gets made to switch over from medicinal care to comfort care. Again, hospice and palliative care people are unbelievable at what they do. We wound up moving her over to a special floor 6, that deals with end-of-life patients. And while you've heard me say repeatedly, all the different staff at different levels of the hospital are amazing at what they do, these nurses on floor 6 are even different. What they do and how they handle a patient that is in end-of-life stage is again amazing. I know I've used that word quite a few times, but it was just crazy how they handled her with such compassion. Even though she was unresponsive, they spoke to her like she was there, engaging in conversation. They just took such great care of her. And anyhow, they wanted to make sure she was comfortable. Pain medicine and everything else through PCA pumps and different things were elevated to the point that we were pretty confident she was comfortable. A few days go by. Ultimately, August 23rd at 11 o'clock, Christian's running down the hallway because they got there late and had trouble parking. Julia's in the room with me, Alyssa's in the room with me. Annie's having all kinds of issues with breathing, her heart rate, you name it. We're telling Christian that he needs to get up to the room. He comes running down the hallway, comes running into the room, and she passes away within 15 seconds of that. We're talking to her the whole time, telling her Christian's coming. And it was about 15 seconds of him coming in the room that she passed away. And it was just amazingly beautiful. If you can't change the end of the story, and it is going to be the way that it was, I don't know that I would have changed much of anything that was written before that. Other than the last few days, she really didn't have much pain or discomfort. She was good. She came to accept a lot of it, as much as I think one can accept that. She found grace in grieving her own death before she passed, which, try to fathom the mental fortitude to do that. She was just an amazingly exceptional person. So she planned her own funeral. She planned her celebration of life. She and I together picked out the headstone and all the writing. And she just, every aspect of it. And she did it because she didn't want to burden anybody else with it, which, again, true Annie fashion. But yeah, it was a very, very beautiful end. And anyhow, I know that was a lot longer than probably what I intended it to be, but there was a lot of detail in there and a lot of stuff that I just left out because it wasn't really important to get through every little single facet of every stage. But that's kind of what happened. Through all that, we had people helping us professionally, personally. There's people that I could never repay for doing what they did. But yeah, I figured this was the easiest way, maybe not the most personal way, but the easiest way just to put something out there that, especially for the people that know she passed away but really aren't sure, what happened. there you have it. The people that are unaware that she passed away, sorry, this is the way you're finding out. But, you know, like I said, it was just at some point we lost track of who we told and who we didn't. And but the whole thing, a lot of good has come from it. I know that sounds super strange. Our whole perception and just perspective and everything about life and family and relationships and service and you name it. It's just so heightened right now. And I hope it stays that way. Just because if she passed away and nothing good came from it, well then, man, what a waste. But there's a lot of momentum right now that she gave to myself, the kids, our family, our friends. She touched a lot of people while she was here. And the way she's touching people now after having passed is even more than what you can imagine. So anyhow, thanks for listening. Hopefully that kind of gives you some insight as to what happened and what we dealt with. But yeah, hope you all have a blessed day.